Sentient is a 1997 real-time adventure game published and developed by Psygnosis for Windows and PlayStation. Psygnosis would develop a bevy of stylish games. It also had one of the coolest logos ever, a stylized owl in icy tones, designed by the artist Roger Dean. Sentient is not amongst Psygnosis's fondly remembered titles. In fact, Issue 2 of Power Play awarded it the worst game in 1998. Did it deserve this dubious distinction? You can judge for yourselves, but it's clearly an incredibly ambitious title, hiding within its identical corridors an impressive simulation of an anxious, overworked crew going about their tasks and motivated by their own goals, with which you can interact with and who interact with each other as they pass in halls or meet in various places in a fashion that prefigures Bethesda's later Radiant AI. Just look at these guys going about their exercising like real people. It's not all about work and play, of course. You have to think quickly and choose your path and alliances carefully to accomplish anything before alarms ring and the station is consumed by the sun. The game was designed with maximum replayability in mind, with some sources claiming 12 endings if we include certain novel failure states. I remember playing the demo of this game as a kid and being absolutely bewildered. I was no less bewildered when I play the game now. It can be at times obtuse, its controls and dialogue system cumbersome and unwieldy, and though there seem to be a lot of systems to engage in, often the wisdom of doing so is questionable. But I wanted to know what was actually going on in this game, and what was happening on this station. Is there something special worth exploring about Sentient? I do think so. To respect my roots, I attempted to play this on PC, but even with DG Voodoo, Sentient is a profoundly ugly game, and an especial hideous mess on PC, so dark and washed out that I had trouble seeing key items in the world, and more importantly, the wonderfully expressive faces of the crew. I've never seen a game where the perspective correct texture mapping was worse on PC than on PlayStation, but here we are. So, combined with the convenience of save states, DuckStation it is for me. We'll go into Sentient systems first before diving deep into the story, exploring the history as your character learns about it, and onto the various endings. Controls on PC and PlayStation both are a nightmare. Games of this vintage typically lack support for a second stick on PlayStation, or a WASD setup on PC, but due to the claustrophobic corridors, this is actually a non-issue. The awkward controls come from the strange, non-standard proliferation of buttons. A button to switch to cursor mode to pick up items, another to open doors, another to access inventory, another to engage in conversation, to go back or cancel an option, and even to express happiness or unhappiness, from grinning like a loon to glowering at people. These facial expressions seem to really only have a very minute effect, as it can be easily overlooked. The dialogue system is incredibly thorough, however, consisting of various preset formulas, allowing you to make statements, demands, and questions by filling in the blank. It feels incredibly flexible, allowing you to ask people how they're feeling, or how they're feeling about someone, or about any sort of topic, or update them on the status of a thing, but the frequency with which you actually get something useful might vary. On top of this dialogue system, one needs to factor in how the character might react. Not every character will respond well to commands, especially if they are a person in authority. Not everyone will respond to flattery. Some people in authority will respond to insults very poorly, just like real life. Some of the best questions are, "How is you?" or "What is happening?", which will usually give you some interesting gossip. Crew members will move about the station on their various tasks in real time, interacting with anyone they bump into on their path. You can ask them what they're doing and they'll tell you. Sometimes it's mundane, sometimes it's worrying. It can often be revealing to just follow a crew member about and learn from their interactions. Take a look at this meeting in the bathroom. Since people are constantly going about their business, you might not be able to find someone you need. The command to lead me to a character might get you there, but also might lead you on a goose chase around the station until the station falls into the sun. Since there are various things that can delay or hasten this event, it's hard to say when exactly this happens. But it feels like it's no less than a couple of hours of time at most that you have, and I've been seconds away from destruction before reaching some of the endings. For that reason, once you have mastered the awkward controls, it's worth internalizing the station layout. At each junction there are painted numbers which, when looked dead on, act as signposts for what's directly ahead. The first number is which ring you are on, from the center out. The second number is the octant, and the last number is the room number, numbered within the octant from center outwards. There are 3 research levels where the scientists and medic work, coded blue. 3 geo levels where the food is grown, coded green. And 3 engineering levels, which house thrusters and Kenyan collection and storage devices, coded red. There are also additional levels relating to auxiliary ship controls that should be inaccessible. Plans for the station can be found in the SUSI database, which also houses historical information and a database of the staff, but at the very start you will be as ignorant as a newborn babe, other than some brief passages on the setting and the main characters provided in the manual. At the main SUSI terminal, you can also set power priority to ship modules in the event of a loss of power. You might have some intuitive thoughts of where power should be best directed, but in actuality, the efficacy is hard to know and might serve as more of a distraction. The same applies to system screens in corridors where you can adjust the power levels of various modules, which generally seem to be a bad idea to mess around with unless required for a specific purpose. There are 3 sliders for difficulty level covering ship management sim, attitude of crew towards you, and the spread of the mysterious radiation disease which, to be honest, I never saw a trace of, and I don't know if it was an accident, an incomplete feature, or another example of Sentient's constant misdirection. The game really demands a notepad, benefiting from recording things such as the room numbers of key characters or the locations of items so they can be grabbed in later playthroughs, or even instructions people tell you that you are very likely to forget. This is honestly my Achilles heel, and I will freely admit I did resort to a walkthrough in parts, but then again, all along I was mostly curious about the story and how it articulates, and I'll be happy to be able to explore that with you now. As our story begins, we play as Garrett Sharpova, a medic sent to investigate reports of a strange radiation sickness aboard the Icarus station. You would think it ill-fated to name it something like that, but no, it happens to be an abbreviation for Instar Corporation's Oriole Raking Urania Station, which makes me even more annoyed. The station's purpose is to harvest the last form of energy available to man, what are called Kenyan particles, found only within living stars, and this particular star, Zexor, presents the richest store of Kenyans ever discovered. We'll explore exactly how humanity has been reduced to these circumstances as our character learns about it. But for now, we watch an introductory video of the hazards we can expect aboard the station that brooks no nonsense.
We thank you for your compliance. You are now approaching Icarus Station. First, you'll encounter ambient temperatures of well over 120 degrees. Overexertion can easily lead to heat stroke, dehydration, or much worse. Stop and rest the moment you feel yourself growing weak. Second, water is a rare commodity. Try not to waste it. Water wasters will be sent before a tribunal. Third, in case of emergency, return to your quarters. Wait for a security officer to advise you how to proceed. Don't while the emergency klaxon is sounding. You might be mistaken for an intruder. Finally, remember Icarus is a primary security zone. Security personnel are authorized to liquidate anyone threatening the station.
Garrett looks over the few items in his luggage, the documents containing his mission briefing from the collective, and the picture of his beloved wife Jian. We cut to a meeting between Chief of Security Raman Jarrell, currently acting as captain, and Senator Tamarin Aiden Edgel, his bloodhound bodyguard looming in the background.
I don't think you'll be disappointed, Senator.
Chief Jarrell, Science Section reports another burst of unusual activity in the sun.
Any idea what's causing it?
No, sir, but it's the largest fluctuation we've seen.
All right, let me know if there are any developments. The incoming medical shuttle just finished beaming over our inbound communiques. Data Central have reason to suspect that Shatterjack has infiltrated this station. They believe that you are his likely target.
What? The political assassin?
You've heard of him.
Of course I have. He murders 27 government officials, and you fools let him on board this station. As head of security, I hold you personally responsible.
It gets worse, Senator. What's Captain Lovey told you about the recent decrease in mining efficiency?
He told me it was because of the plague outbreak. The emergency medical team should sort that out when they arrive.
It's not the plague. Our orbit has been steadily declining for the past 96 hours. We've had to divert energy from mining to the thrusters, and that's brought us another 72 hours before we slide into the sun. We're trying to solve the problem, but it's not easy. Data Central are aware, but I'm warning you now in case you want to leave the station.
I have to stay here.
Incoming shuttle. I have you.
Suddenly you come tearing in with your goofy-ass Pinocchio face and cheesy action-themed music to crash into the dock without authorization. The station stirs into action over the potential terrorist threat as you step from the wreckage, rack up some rad points, and begin to survey the damage. I'll be going into detail on the plot, backstory, and eventually revealing every ending I could find. If you don't want this spoiled, skip ahead to my thoughts on the story here. Otherwise, keep watching. You take stock of your situation. A human form is sprawled across the ground on the other side of the hangar. You can find an environmental suit in the rubble next to the body. You can scan the body with your medical scanner to find out that it's a man named Kajinam. Then you can use your first aid kit to restore him to some consciousness. Kajinam rises and asks for your help in activating the shields while he opens the door. You have mere seconds to follow him through the door before the isolation procedure locks it behind him. If you don't make it, you may be forced to wait minutes before Susie, the ship AI, shuts off everything to that part of the ship and you pass out. If you squeeze through the door, Kajinam will need a moment to find his breath before moving on to the cargo hold in which await 2 security officers. "Drum, blast that man," one of them shouts. Kajinam's protests are silenced as Drum tells you it's only a stun gun. He fires and... Once everything stops spinning, you find yourself in an immaculately kept grass hedge maze, while in the background, bucolic hills roll serenely into the horizon. Using orange pillars for orientation, you eventually come to a door, and when it opens, Garrett finds himself standing in front of someone wearing the face of his wife Jian.
Jian? Jian, it's me! Jian, aren't you my wife?
No.
Who are you?
Jian. Sometimes.
Who are you?
Come on, Garrett. Get with the program.
Who are you?
Who am I? Silly question. Who are you, Garrett?
What is this place?
You mean, who is this place? I can't tell you, but But if you find me again, I'll give you a clue.
When you come round, Dr. Imric Kamal greets you, and though he seems friendly enough, if you take too long to identify yourself, he will very firmly advise you of the station's heightened alert over a terrorist threat. If the implicit presence of the suspicious security officer next to him hadn't made it obvious. Either telling him your name or presenting him with your credentials in your pocket will go a long way to assuaging his doubts. As Kamal is called away, you can inquire about a special guest that is causing so much fuss, and find out the High Senator of the Council himself is aboard, Senator Aidan Edgell. You spend some time in the sickbay under the watchful eye of Officer Vusto. Kajinam is recovering on a bed nearby, and he talks to you, offering his thanks and giving the mysterious phrase, "We turn to the skies." When Kamal returns, he gives you an inoculation of some sort that again sends you into another strange vision of the simulacrum of Xi'an.
I promised only a clue.
A clue, then. Mother?
Rings within rings. Wasn't that what you said on Zerki?
Xi'an. So, you are my wife.
Find me again and I'll give you another.
When you come around again, although Security Officer Vusto expresses his reservations over too many unusual circumstances and contradictory information, you are still allowed to go about your duties. Chief Medical Officer Dania Luvi gives you your first assignment, to get a radiation report of a man named Malachek. You can ask him if he has the report, and he does, and you have to actually command him to give it to you to receive it. He whines a little about how hard it was, and then suggests cross-referencing it against the Kenyan report, if I wanted to make an impression. Malachek is the guy that expects everyone else to do the work. Still unfamiliar with the station, you search through the rooms, occasionally stopping to chat with the staff and find out what's happening. Medics go from room to room to administer stimulants. The engineer called Both is apparently starting to crack under the workload. Or perhaps something deeper is at play. There's a mistrust between the medical staff, the engineers, and the scientists. The engineers think they're being treated as guinea pigs. When you startle Freddie Mercury in his quarters, he yells about testing, and you once again get obliviated back to Blinkerton by a stun gun.
You promised me another clue.
I'm hurt, though she doesn't know it.
I need another clue.
You! Go on! That way!
The face behind your wife is Navigator Yehana Ta of the mysterious sorority of navigators, which we can read about later in the Suzy database. The Freddie Mercury lookalike apologizes, thinking you were someone else, and stumbles through an explanation of how he believes the medical staff intentionally infected him with radiation disease and ran tests on him. He begs you to search for evidence. You eventually find the Kenyan report you've been searching for, in addition to a different report by the Chief of Science, Dr. Azira. Together they paint a troubling picture. The Chief Engineer Garalak, grateful for saving one of his crew, requests a meeting. He's worried about what's happening aboard the station and wants to risk trusting you, a neutral outside party not yet entangled in station politics, to bring him any information you can find. You begin with what you've just discovered in your various reports. The science personnel are increasing the yield of Kenyans by decreasing the orbit and hiding it from engineering. You show him Azira's report as evidence, and he suggests using it to blackmail Dr. Azira. When you visit the doctor, he will, apropos of nothing, casually tell you about his mind control experiment, very ominously named Anamnesis Cradle. You advise him that Garalak has seen the report, and he gives in and explains how to create a disk to overwrite the navigation data and save the station, which you promptly hand over to Garalak. You can talk to Aztec, Garalak's second in command, and he'll give you various leads. musing on the presence of the senator being on board a station with an infectious radioactive disease, and dropping a very interesting piece of information about a hidden file on Chief of Security Raman Jarrell. Garrelak had told you he had been lost in his head, murmuring the words "sure enough" constantly. And sure enough is surely enoughly the magic words. So it turns out the Chief of Security was having an affair with Dania Luvi, the captain's wife, and killed him when he surprised them all together. What a scandalous piece of news. On your way back to Garrelak, you wonder what this new spark will do to a power keg of engineers on an endless diet of work and stimulants to maintain a station that the scientists seemed hell-bent on throwing into the sun. As if you didn't have enough to worry about, a solar flare hits the station, causing damage to Geodome 2. Engineer Yori and Officer Hamie Lucas were there when the deck got hit. The growth room is irradiated, causing an outbreak of mutant vegetation to ravage the station. Yori devises a plan to use pesticides to bring it under control, but the pesticide only works in low-temperature environments. For some reason, you have to hop into the shower with Hamie to talk to her about it. Her face covered in blisters as she tries to wash the radiation away. She gives you her environmental suit, and when you put it on, an officer near the elevator authorizes you to teleport to the quarantine deck. Yori's friend Gunny is still in Geodome 2, frantically trying to fight the infestation. Working together, Gunny applies the pesticide while you lower the power to the atmosphere node, momentarily, and for the second time perhaps, saving the ship. Or buying more time. The Senator's bloodbound bodyguard Jin personally seeks you out to tell you, with his typical blunt delivery, to see the Senator. As a voice over the PA calls for the immediate arrest of Garrelak and the engineers, you remember you still have the evidence tape of Raman Jarrell's mutinous murder burning a hot little hole in your infinite space pocket. Here your path could potentially diverge. You could return to Garrelak with the evidence, and he'll devise a plan where you will steal the beacon that calls the Senator's private yacht from its safe hiding place to use it as a bargaining chip. You can sneak into the room and steal it, and here is another sub-fork within this fork. You can choose to damn everybody to a fiery death and leave aboard the Senator's private yacht. Assuming you find the path of a selfish sociopath somewhat unfulfilling, give the private beacon to Garrelak, and he'll immediately go to the Senator for authorization to detach the station from its pods and fly away from the sun, saving the engineers but dooming the rest of the people on board the station to their deaths. Assuming that many deaths are unpalatable to your sensibilities, there are some slightly better scoring and more ethical options. Accede with the Senator's request for a visit, and you can present your discoveries to him instead. You can present him with the information for Azira's dangerous meddling, and for Raman Jarrell's murder of the captain, and he tells you to leave both in his hands, now utterly convinced of your worth. You are under no obligation to wait around, but if you do, you can watch a little trial unfold. Follow Zero to his cell afterwards, and he confesses to you that the corrected orbital data that you gave the engineers is actually false, because Azira is a man whose passions in life are science and shenanigans, and sometimes both at the same time and sometimes on your mum. The ship announces that the engineering staff are returned to duty and the security staff are relieved, and you have been promoted to the highest authority, so you stroll sedately to the highest pace the game allows to Garalak's side, relieved to find out that they had yet to initialize the false orbital plans. Since you're basically the acting captain now, you have the highest level of access to the ship's database, including restricted historical records that give a slightly more complete picture of the setting's background, and complete profiles of everyone aboard, with notes written by the station's secret political officer. We learn political officers are stationed on every station, and this one appears to write to the Senate requesting transfers or even requesting drugs administered to the crew, either routinely or covertly, as the situation warrants. If the station weren't blowing up, you can learn a lot of things. We learn, for example, that Malachek is disliked and seeks to discredit his superiors for personal gain, to the point of submitting a then unsubstantiated report of Dr. Luvi being distracted in her work by personal issues. We learn that all crew members in the engineering section are assumed to be terrorist sympathizers and Labour Solidarity accomplices, and are under constant observation. We learn Garalak is fiercely loyal to his men. His family died while he was off-world, his planet being devastated for the crime of not complying with the Senator's Protectorate Codex of Actions. Much of the engineering staff have criminal records, while one scientist's murder was swept under the rug as a bit of juvenile excess. In one entry, the political officer expresses alarm at the stupidity of some of the security, and regarding one officer Stabelli, he writes, "Stabelli is a dimwit who should be transferred off this installation at once. If communication with command is not re-established soon, he may be retired to ensure he makes no mistakes." We have the impression that these are all transmitted in reports to the Senate for approval and action. For one crew member's mother issues, he writes a request to arrange for Dr. Luvi to administer regressive hypnotherapy. Both is absolutely loopy. Everyone talks about it. You can observe it firsthand. In researching this game, I came across one long play where Both gives you an MS Paint looking drawing of a bunny rabbit. The political officer explains that Both has been a bit out of sorts since he was arrested at a Labour rally and lost his fingers while organising resistance during his 10-year stint in prison. Poor Both. Medtech Kata was attacked at an experimental worker breeding lab. It was alleged to be precipitated by cruelty to one of the worker specimens. Due to a clerical error, she was transferred onto the Icarus and forced to work alongside those worker specimens in engineering. Baron Fritz, the paranoid engineer who shot you with a stun gun, has a mysterious origin and a missing arm wound that looks over 10 years old, and could perhaps be one of those tortured worker specimens. Dr. Holman Azira is considered the prized jewel in the crown of the station, and possibly, in the collective, a genius in his field and destined for political greatness. The political officer's orders are to help him however he can. Then there's Navigator Yehanata, the face at the end of your visions. The ancient sorority of navigators have a stranglehold on transportation, saving them from persecution for their unorthodox religious beliefs, which would normally violate government policy. The same beliefs are behind a 20-year guerrilla war fought by the nationalistic Livan Shu against the bloodbound warriors, possibly with the sorority's backing. They believe in the coming of the Damiya, a long-prophesied messiah whose identity and purpose have long been debated, and whose details are impenetrable even when that prophecy was fed into computers. There is plenty of work for the messiah to be doing, whether righting immediate wrongs, or the wrongs from the distant past, whose classified records we can now review in full. Long ago under the Torrendine Empire, as the Imperial Expeditionary Force was exploring the boundaries of space, charting new systems to no doubt exploit, they came across pictograms in the abandoned colonies of an advanced alien race known as the Celestachia. At the time, Emperor Torrendine determined that the presence of these aliens posed a threat to a colony in the nearby Imperial system, and ordered the destruction of any non-Imperial vessel found. In an event that was sold to the public as an attack on the Empire, they attempted to capture one of the alien vessels and failed spectacularly, losing the fleet in the process. Survivors reported a preternatural fear so strong that it incapacitated them. To sell the war to the public, this was labelled the Border Wars, and was used as a casus belli to rally support and justify further attacks on the aliens. Although the actual physical appearance of the aliens was unknown, the Orwellianly labelled Imperial Ministry of Expression called the species insects to provoke some sense of primal disgust amongst the populace, and the war was dubbed the Insect War. At its height, the aliens launched the civilization-ending Death's Head missiles, capable of extinguishing stars, and succeeded in bringing endless darkness to each of the 13 worlds of the Imperium, until finally humanity left to save themselves at the very fringes of space, on a system of worlds with only one entry point. In truth, the very last star was destroyed by the Imperial fleet itself, with their own star-killing weapon, to make it more difficult for the aliens to track them in their exodus to this distant corner. As should be clear from the political officer's notes, the regime that succeeded the Torrendine Empire after its collapse was no less authoritarian. Despite a thin veneer of democratic terminology, the new hegemony absorbed the scattered remnants of the former empire, as well as newly discovered local human populations that had resided there since before the Exodus. The database describes how these indigenous populations were offered limited citizenship as annexed imperial protectorates, but in reality the use of brutality would not be surprising. In addition to a tertiary citizenship system, indigenous control centers and labor camps are all too familiar to the crew according to their profiles. Digitals, a sort of android, were used to terraform the landscape and then later to clear these natives from locations with important resources. These digitals had their memories set to clear after 10 years. Although the database states the authorities are expending a great many resources to hunt dangerous scientific radicals seeking to break these failsafes. If you spend too much time dawdling over the database, Navigator Tar may come to you, requesting your aid. Her ward and apprentice, Giacomo, has gone missing. She believes in an attempt to save the ship, he is performing a dangerous ritual that could kill him. If you're in time, you can work together with an engineer to bust him out of the room he's locked himself up in. When you get to him, he has succeeded in the ritual. He loses sight, but he's not blind, as he puts it, and thanks you by giving you a gold necklace, which the database explains as some sort of profound sentimental gift custom of navigators. Giacomo then uses his newfound powers to guide the station away from the sun. If you don't go with the navigators, you could possibly find a printout from the ship's computer Susie, with mostly very brief conceptual language suggesting the stars are talking to each other. If you prompt Susie on it, she seems to break down when trying to analyze whether it's an alien language. The key comes in the form of a braille book found in Navigator Tar's room, which might be that prophesied book of the Messiah. You can scan the book and upload it directly to Susie's databanks, and then need to assist her in the main research lab by keeping the canyons flowing as she deciphers the navigational data.
I'm picking up a new message. Class 6, energy impact imminent.
What did they say? Susie, what did they say?
Decoding, 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 decoding.
Come on, damn it. Friend! Friend!
Friend! They signaled friend. Dressed as overcoming gravity. Station accelerating at 4G. I'm picking up a new message. Go. They're signaling go. I'm picking up a new message. Difficult to decode. The same pattern as cycling. Pattern still 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 cycling.
Go! Forever!
They signal friend. Off, friend. This is by no means the last of Sentient's endings. Assuming you witnessed the 3 visions and have done everything correctly to that point, after you confront Susie about the messages from the sun, Susie will call you back and dismiss the technician in the room to have Kamek personally announce something monumental to you. Your presence aboard and meteoric rise through the station are no coincidence. You're in fact one of the digitals, the digital messiah even, and your destiny is to take the small one-man ship, usually used for maintenance of the energy collection web, the Web Runner, and pilot into the sun to save the station. Immortality awaits. What happens if we follow our destiny? The highest scoring ending involves not being a chump. Instead, you use Dr. Azira's mind experiment to transfer a copy of your mind into the Web Runner ship. Although considering everything we've read about life in the new hegemony, vacationing on the sun might have been the better option. There are also some unique fail states that might charitably be called a kind of ending for your character, like destroying the ship by microwaving a battery. Or destroying the ship by pressing the big red do not press button. By far the best is at the very start. If you don't save the engineer Kajinam, and instead just wait around until you collapse, you will be confronted immediately on awaking by Ram and Jarell, and a security officer, and given up to Dr. Zero for his experiments. There you'll run through a 3D maze with awkward disorienting controls, until the center takes you away for a show trial as the terrorist Shatterjack. So you technically avoided dying in the sun if you consider that a win. My feelings on the plot are complicated. So much of the background is buried in database entries that become declassified only in one branch of the story. In a way this works, as in each playthrough or reload, you see the small glimpse of what's happening below the surface, in interactions of the crew or as you get swept along in crew politics. When I reflect on a game, I try to be aware of my biases. In playing a game called Sentient, I expected something more philosophical. My expectations shouldn't take away from recognizing its accomplishments in the way the story unravels and articulates. It's a real-time choose-your-own-adventure story with choices and consequences, constantly misdirecting and defying your expectations. Ultimately, I had no idea where the game would go, and took joy in that, but unfortunately where it eventually went felt to me a little shallow. But I reiterate that it might be a problem with my own expectations with seeing various sci-fi tropes paraded about without deeper engagement. Sentient constantly misdirects. There's a genre of sci-fi that deals with spaceship MacGyvering, using science to create scientific solutions, which you see in movies such as Apollo 13 or The Martian. And early on I thought this is where we were headed. Then there are also some obvious allusions to Dune and its sorority of navigators being a clear mix of the Bene Gesserit with the Dune navigators, not to mention the prophesied Messiah mentioned. Then the rumours of experiments intrigued me. At times I wondered if perhaps we had a Solaris situation, or did we have a Blade Runner situation? Part of my disappointment with the game did stem from seeing so many tropes paraded about without a deeper engagement. But in an interview with RetroPlayer on the defunct website The Gaming Liberty, the developers stated outright their influences. The reason for so much misdirection and for its variegated melange of tropes might lie in its chief inspiration, the pen and paper role-playing game Paranoia. In Paranoia, mankind lives underground, with society organized and led by an all-powerful computer in a constant state of war with both external enemies and internal threats, comprising such things as communists, mutants, and secret societies. The player characters operate as troubleshooters, soldiers at the bottom of a hierarchical society color-coded along the lines of the infrared spectrum, eager to please the computer and progress through the ranks. Unfortunately, every player also has a mutant ability and is part of a secret society, both of which can assist them, but are also cause for termination by the rules of the conformist but also psychotic computer. The influence on Sentient is clear, from the Byzantine plots and oppressive atmosphere of suspicion, both on a societal level as detailed in the database, and on an interpersonal level amongst the characters, through to the colour styling and hierarchical society. Unlike so many games in Fallen Comrades, Paranoia is still alive and kicking, with the last edition being published in 2022. It does seem like a very interesting game. If Sentient leaves you with hankering for sci-fi solar-related adventures, there's always Sunshine, the 2007 film about astronauts on a ship also annoyingly called Icarus, on a mission to launch a bomb into the sun to reignite it. Why would you call it dataless? I don't know, maybe they... I don't know. The developers would also state System Shock as an influence, which can sometimes be seen visually. Visually, the game had to make compromises. In fact, the layout of the station is a compromise so that not too much of it can be seen at once. The station was never intended to be beautiful, and pictures of old submarines and decommissioned ships were used as a visual reference. The vision scenes with pristine hedge mazes and your goofy character model wearing some sort of Baroque golden cyberpunk robe prove an interesting tonal contrast to the rusty corridors. With DuckStation's texture processing improving the detail, the character of the faces and their absurd expressions are definitely memorable. I've always intentionally called this section visuals because I care less about graphics versus how the game succeeds in expressing its vision as an art. And sometimes great art and great visuals can be created from limitations. I'm not going to argue that this is one of those examples, but games are also almost always some sort of simulation, and I've always been drawn to look for certain things that might betray or reinforce that simulation. I'll always appreciate the effort a developer goes into adding toilets and showers, because even if you don't use them, they lend credibility to the world. Visually crude as it is, and the graphics really are crude, it is a decent attempt at a simulation. People exercise in the exercise room. There's a cafeteria where they presumably eat, a theatre where they can watch training movies, and there's even a peaceful garden with a patch of grass and soil, and the stars visible, where crew can collect their thoughts. I respect the attention to detail. Outside of the game's cutscenes, there is no dialogue. The game doesn't even have music. All we ever really hear are footsteps and the humming or beeping of electrical devices. And sometimes loud, piercing alarms informing you of impending disasters. But the sound, sparse as it is very crisp and high quality. And interestingly enough, the game supports Dolby Surround, which isn't too common for PlayStation games of this era. This is probably thanks to the work of audio engineer Rick Eade, who is credited with music and effects. Despite the fact there is no music in the game, in Germany Sentient came with a limited edition that had a separate audio CD, and it's not bad. Some of it appears to be full-length tracks of music very briefly heard in the cutscenes. Some is a lot funkier than it has any right to be. And others undulate with an exotic air. The main motif is an eerie, oscillating melody that echoes throughout the album. Rick Eade was also responsible for the soundtrack of the 1999 reimagining of Lander, which also had a surround sound release, which is really nifty. As someone who owns a cheap surround sound system, let me tell you, listening to Queen or Pink Floyd remastered in surround sound is an amazing experience, and surround sound video game tracks are almost unheard of. Sentient is an unforgiving game. It is a challenging game, and a challenging game to like, with an incredible attention to detail in its real-time simulation of a failing space station. And its awkward systems, some of which are either non-functioning or seem to be yet another of the game's misdirections. As deep as its backstory goes, the game's endings tend to feel shallow, and we are left with the impression that the game is a mile wide, but an inch deep. Its uncompromising uniqueness is something I can't help but admire, especially in its experiments in narrative. The reason why we fondly remember games like its contemporary Fallout, as well as later BioWare games so fondly, is that they broke the mold of linear gameplay. The difference is they succeeded. Sentient was another such pioneer, one that unfortunately failed. In its rough and cumbersome gameplay, you can see the unique potential games have as a narrative medium, a potential still not fully realized even today, by allowing for multiple intersecting branching paths, unreliable characters with their own competing motivations, and by manipulating the player's expectations and decisions through the information fed to them. Even now, I'm not entirely sure I've seen every interesting piece of dialogue or factoid in Sentient, and as thorough as I was, there could still be some small subplot involving some characters that I missed entirely. Sentient fails in balancing its strengths with an appropriate level of accessibility, and maybe to live up to its own narrative ambitions it sets in the player's imagination. It falters, one might say, by flying too close to the sun. Womp womp. Should have called the station Daedalus. Mwah.